Hi, it's Jamie from Guildbrook Farm, and welcome to The Dirt. Today I want to talk a little bit about the differences between public school and homeschooling and what we do here. Think of The Dirt as a getting to know you session, and with there being a lot of controversy in the news these days about how the United States public education is ranked 28th in the world behind a lot of other third world countries, I thought now would be a good time to cover the topic of homeschooling and public schooling. There are a lot of you out there who may be currently in public school who are thinking of pulling your kids out in homeschooling. And then there are a lot of homeschoolers who maybe it's just not working out, or maybe mom or dad has to go back to work and you're thinking about doing public school again. So I wanted to cover some of the different topics that come up when it comes to public school and homeschooling, because we do both. We do both public school and homeschooling, and that's kind of a unique perspective that we might be able to offer to some of you guys who might need help with understanding both sides of things. So currently my kids, when they're with their dad, they go to public school full time, and when they're with me, we do homeschooling. Now, there is many reasons for that, but what I've found out is that this actually works in the best interest of our girls, because they like being in both worlds. Now for me, if I had the choice, I would just do homeschooling, and if their dad had the choice, he would just do public schooling. So this combination actually does work out in all ways. So let's go over some of the topics and some of the topics that come up with schooling, and cover the different views of that. So skill level is one, and this to me is probably one of the biggest gaps in our public education system. So my oldest daughter, who is currently in 7th grade, she actually is the youngest in her class, and from when she was real little, like kindergarten and 1st grade, I think that she had some developmental delays in understanding some abstract concepts, in particular when it came to, say, math. And because she didn't understand some of the core concepts when she was small, she's struggling a lot more now that she's older. And unfortunately, the class just goes on without her. So if she doesn't understand a concept, she has to figure it out on her own, and that's a real struggle for her to do that, because that's the way the classrooms work. They don't work with the individual, they work with the bulk of the class. And then there, on the opposite end of the spectrum, is my youngest daughter, who's currently in 5th grade. Now, she is more advanced in some subjects, but she's actually being discouraged from doing more advanced reading. So for example, she had a book project recently where she got to choose any book she wanted. She just so happened to choose Swiss Family Robinson, the unabridged edition, which is about an 11th or 12th grade reading level. And she read this over the period of about 4 months. Now, why did it take her 4 months? Well, one, because it was a tome of a book, and secondly, she had to read 3 or 4 books in between reading this one book. So she started it over the summer, and she didn't finish it until October. And at the end of October, she had to take a test on it. And I'm not quite sure where the test questions came from, but when I talked to her teacher, he said that she got 50% of them wrong. And he said that the test questions were based off of the reading level, so they are 11th, 12th grade questions that she had to answer. And that he was discouraging her from reading anything else of that level. He wanted her to come down to a 5th grade or 6th grade level, because the only thing he could go by was her grades, and at that point she only got a 50%, which was not passing. And unfortunately, that's what he had to go by, was her grade. Now, I completely disagree with that. I know a lot of you guys would agree with that, but me personally, I view that as she understood 50% of an 11th or 12th grade reading level. And I think that if she wasn't distracted with 3 or 4 books in between that she also had to take tests on, that she would have done a lot better. And in addition to that, after she took that test, she ended up having to do a book report on it. And so she had to get back into it and reread a lot of different parts. She ended up creating a cute little YouTube video on it and doing a poster and a presentation. So she did end up, I think, understanding the book a lot more thoroughly than what was conveyed by this test. So probably one of the biggest things is, public schools are very much grade-based. And if I think any kid that wants to read at an 11th or 12th grade level, and even if they only understand half of it, which again, I think that had to do more with the time period she read it over and all the distractions than anything else, why discourage a kid from doing that? So there's a disagreement there in the different approaches. So with skill level in homeschooling, it's completely different. Now, when you're homeschooling a kid, you're able to take the time to cover a topic, whether it takes one day to cover that topic or whether it takes 1 or 2 weeks to cover that topic. And I think that's probably the biggest difference when it comes to skill level between public school and homeschooling. Public school is going to move on without you. They want you to stay with what everyone else is doing in the class. Whereas in homeschooling, you can take the time to slow down, take your time, and cover a topic better. Or if your kid's advanced, let them be advanced and let them move on to the next topic. So that brings me to the next issue or topic with homeschooling and public schooling, which is testing. Now, and just like I mentioned, that one teacher was very much concerned about the grades. Public schools are very grade-based, whereas homeschooling, not grade-based at all. Now, in North Carolina, if we were to homeschool full-time, we would have to take an end-of-the-year exam. It is a requirement, and you'd have to check to see what your state is if you were to do something like that. We do not have to do that because we are not homeschooling full-time. We're just kind of doing this as a supplement to public schooling. But there would be testing either way, whether it's in public school or homeschooling. But with homeschooling, as far as the day-to-day test or the week-to-week tests, that's not necessary unless you wanted to do that. If you have a kid who gets very stressed about testing, you might, rather than having an ABCD test or an essay, there are other ways to test your kids with homeschooling. On the other hand, with public schooling, now, my youngest daughter actually enjoys being tested. They have, in her elementary school, they have a way where if she answers a question correctly, they advance her onto a harder question on that same topic. And then they keep advancing her. She gets the questions right. And if she answers a question incorrectly, they dumb it down, so to speak, so she has an easier question. And then if she gets that wrong, she has an easier question. So she actually really enjoys being tested, and whereas my older daughter does not. So on that aspect, my younger daughter actually really likes the public school testing. My older daughter, not so much. Social aspect. Well, this is one that comes up all the time when it comes to public school versus homeschooling. Now, up here where we are, there are no kids in our neighborhood that are my kids' age. If we were to homeschool full-time, we would have to join some sort of homeschooling group to socialize with other kids. There'd have to be a forced socialization there, which I'm not a real big fan of, to be perfectly honest. I really don't like forced interactions for socialization, but I do think it's really important for kids. And they think so as well, because when asked, my kids both enjoy public school because of the socialization. That is probably the biggest reason that they both like public school. Now, of course, there is a negative aspect to that as well. Bullying being one, peer pressure being another. These are all things that have come up in the past, and some of them have been quite a challenge to deal with in the public school, with some of the bullying and peer pressure. I don't particularly like it, but I also think it's also, in a sense, character building as well, because kids will be exposed to it whether they're in school, whether they're in college, or whether they're in the workforce. And they do need to learn to deal with some of the controversial things that come up with dealing with people. Now, I would prefer them to be not exposed to that kind of stuff, but I can understand the benefits of them being exposed to it as well. But if given the choice, the girls would actually prefer public schooling based on the socialization of that. So another topic is the subjects in general that they cover. So with public school, you have your core curriculum that you need to study. So your math and your language arts and your science, your social studies. These are all things that are core topics that they need to cover. And classrooms go through it at a pretty quick pace. So if there's anything that a kid might really latch on to or be interested in, you're on it, then you're off it, and you're on to the next one. You take a test, you move on to the next topic, take a test, move on to the next topic. And it's getting through the year in a very progressive manner. Whereas with homeschooling, you can pick whatever topics you want. And if you have a kid that is particularly interested in one area, you can really go down that rabbit hole. So my oldest daughter is really into the golden age of China, and she was covering this in public school, but she really didn't get to go into it too much in public school. So that's something that if you were homeschooling full time, you could really stay on that topic a long time and have them be interested in that. And maybe that's something they'd want to go into or study after college, or after high school. Maybe they'd want to study that kind of thing. So I think encouraging that interest is really important, and it's a real benefit to homeschooling. Now, probably one of the last things is time. My kids wake up at 6 a.m. and they don't come home until 3 p.m. And that's a long time at school, in public school. Prior, a couple years ago, they actually, when they were at their dad's, they actually went to after school. And so they were up at 6 a.m. and their dad didn't get them until 6 p.m. That's 12 hours. On top of that, then they come home and then they have to do homework. I don't know anybody, adults, who consciously work more than an 8-hour day and then have to come home and do more work. Now, there are some jobs that require that, but people don't want to do that intentionally. That's a lot to put on kids, on little kids. And I don't really think, because public schools they spend a lot of their time correcting behavior and getting through topics as quickly as possible, that there's a lot of homework that's usually sent home with these kids, like several hours worth sometimes. And I think that's a lot. I think it's too much for kids. Honestly, I just do. Whereas the difference is at homeschool, you can spend 15 to 30 minutes on a topic, and that's what we do here. When we go into something, 15, 30 minutes tops, and then we move on to something else. And there's a huge difference in time spent in actual learning. And I think by doing it in shorter increments, I do think their attention span is better, and it also encourages them to think about what you just talked about, what you just studied a little bit better. So I think maybe you're getting the impression that I'm anti-public school and pro-homeschooling, and I actually am. If given the choice, personally, I would prefer to homeschool my kids full-time. But when I ask my kids what they prefer, they actually prefer the combination. They really enjoy going to public school and then being supplemented on the side with homeschooling. So what are some of the things that we cover here? Well, we cover, because my kids are currently going to public school, I don't slam them with a ton of things when they come here, because that's just way too much work on top of all the other work that they're doing. But we do math, and which helps my older daughter in particular. And then we also cover grammar. These are core topics that we cover, two topics, and they only do that for 15 minutes each on the weekends. So it's really quick and they're done. And then during some other periods, like during holidays or during the summer, we cover other things. Like we'll cover history is one of our favorite book series, and they actually have a television series, is Horrible Histories. And we absolutely love that. It's just a really kind of gruesome and interesting way of learning history. And I've actually learned quite a few things from watching that. We also do a lot of opinion papers. So I will have my kids research a topic and give their opinion on it. For example, we were talking about disbudding of goats, which is removing the horns and whether or not that's beneficial or not. I had my kids research what is disbudding, what are the pros of disbudding, what are the cons of disbudding, and what is your opinion? And then we would sit down and compare notes. One would read their answer, the other would read their answer, and then I would have them critique each other. And what I encourage during these sessions is that if you have difference of opinion, that's okay. So I want them to be secure in having their own opinion on a topic based on the research that they're doing. But I also want them to listen to other people's opinions. So in this case, their sisters, if they have something different or some different opinion. So we do a lot like that as well. So one of the biggest things that I'm seeing these days is how this next generation is crying about free education. Here's the thing, education's already free. All the information you want to know about anything is already out there, and the majority of it's for free. You just have to find it. So these people that are crying about wanting free education, they don't want free education. They just want a free piece of paper that says they have a degree. Because anything you want to learn about is already out there. And this is coming from someone that has a degree and that has advanced degree. And I just don't feel personally that what I got out of college from my professors is anywhere near the level that I have learned on my own. And I have seen this through multiple people that don't have degrees, how they are self-taught and how far advanced they are compared to somebody who comes through the institution and has that piece of paper. So I think teaching your kids how to research and how to learn on their own from a very young age is a really, really key concept, and it's something that I'm strongly encouraging, through my homeschooling. So the differences between public school and homeschooling, well, I gave you those answers from my perspective. I'd love to hear what your perspective is. Do you guys homeschool? Do you guys do public school? Are you guys thinking of some combination? Like I said, my kids, they prefer the combination. That's what they like. And I can see the benefit in that. So if you like this kind of stuff, like and subscribe. And I'll probably do some other videos on maybe some of the different topics we cover when we are here in homeschooling. So stay tuned and we'll see you next time.